I'm going to start this. All right, should we do this?
Yeah.
All right, let's give this a whirl. Okay, so the idea is to build basically what's in this like very basic Express Auth example, like a very wordy name. But essentially, you have like a button, you can press that button, and it sends data to a database that's living on the internet, so that you can access it from your phone or wherever you'd like. And so the very first thing I guess I would do, like in building this, like such a project, I guess, would be, so I'm gonna go to my terminal, and I'm just gonna, oh man, I'm gonna look at all my projects. I'm gonna like make a file or make a folder. Let's make this bigger. Here, let's say like demo. Okay, I'm gonna go into my demo folder. I'm gonna like open this thing up. So there's nothing in this demo folder right now. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go npm init. So this is like creating a node, a little universe in this folder, and it's going to ask me all these questions like, what's the project name? This is called demo, version 1, blah blah blah. Okay, so it's like you're just stepping through all these questions that is added to this package.json file. So yes, so now this package.json file gets produced, and so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, like a really good person, create a README file. So I'm going to do touch readme.md. So now I've got like a README file, super cool demo. Okay, this is exactly what I sound like when I'm working at home by myself. So then I'm going to create a git ignore file. So I'm going to put touch.git ignore. So touch is the command to like create a file. So I'm going to go into this git ignore thing, and I'm going to ignore the files which typically you don't want to check into GitHub. So it's this like ds-store thing, which is a Mac thing. You just like basically never want to check in your node modules. It's just like hundreds of thousands of files, and GitHub will be really mad, and you'll basically like kill your versioning software, because you'll be like checking the versions of all of these like node modules, which you don't want to do. So node modules, I think probably that's it for now.
I have some question about that touch command, or I guess just in general what we're doing in the terminal. Like, is that a Node.js command, or is that like?
It's like a bash, like your system has that like baked in. You could also just do like new file, new folder and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's all, this is, I don't know why I'm doing it that way. But I'm trying to like get used to doing this kind of stuff, because like let's say you're working like directly on a server and you need to like, create files and stuff. There's no like right click create file. You just have to like, learn how to what is in the terminal. So we can kind of blend it up. We can like mix it up like halfway through. Okay, so we like created these files, and now it's like time to install all the things that we need. And since we're using npm, we know that we're going to build like an Express project. We're going to want like Mongoose, since we're going to use like MongoDB. So there's like, we're just going to install a bunch of things. So let's do npm install. Let's do Express, Mongoose. What else goes in there? Is it like Express Basic Auth? This thing called Morgan. It's like a logging program that like helps you like log stuff. What else goes in here? Okay, let's just do that for now, and then it's like as you do npm install. So like this node modules folder just popped up, and if we check here, you can see in your dependencies we've got Express, Express Basic Auth, Morgan, Mongoose. And I'm just gonna check and see what else we need usually. HTTP.env. Okay, and this is like totally kosher to do, just like to check like other projects that have the same functionality that you want. So I'm gonna be like, yeah. Oh yeah, whoops. Let me also make, can I make this bigger? It's font. Keys. General. You would think this would be like a general preference.
I think Command plus works.
Okay, yeah, let's, all right. So npm install HTTP. What was the other one? Oh yeah, .env. So that we're going to get to. This is also very important for us. So .env. I think that's good. Okay. So we've got these. Oh, and we're going to also install node-mon as like a development dependency. So we can do npm install node-mon -- save dev. So this save dev flag indicates that like we want to save that as a development dependency. So, like when you like deploy your project, since other people like aren't going to be developing that thing like when it's living on a server, it's this command npm install but with this save dev flag, and what it does is it saves it as a development dependency.
Is that relates to when you do a development branch?
No, it's like a way to specify that there are other dependencies which aren't related to the core functionality of your application. It's just meant for like you as you're building your project. So like node-mon is this thing which like refreshes your project if you make a change, and that is like a thing which doesn't need to get deployed. Yeah. So okay, so we've like installed all this stuff, and now we should like do something with it. So oops, let's see it. Yeah, I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay, all right. So now, what are we doing? Okay, right. So let's like now I'm gonna go and do this like new file thing. And I'm going to create a file called index.js. And so this is like our server. We're like now going to like build our project. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to like create our server stuff, like all of our server code. So how does it all start? Well, we're like, okay, I'm going to const express equals require express, and so this require function is like the function that allows you to read in all the dependencies into your server code. And then you're like, okay, const app is equal to express, and you're like, okay, so now you have like your express, and you've like you instantiated your app using the express function. I think on like the bare minimum thing, you could just, now we need HTTPS, so const HTTP equals require HTTP. So it's like it's like very repetitive, but I think you can get the feeling for how it all works. So the HTTP dot create server, and it's like nice to have these function recommendations because I can never remember everything. So you're going to create a server from your app, and then you're going to listen to it at, so let's say just like 3000 for now. And it takes a callback function, oops. And then let's see, console.log, see the magic at HTTP. Oh no, let's do it this way. Const port equals 3000. We're going to change this port stuff in a second, but we're going to like, you can imagine that if we want a 3001, 8080, you could like change the port number of where it's living, but we're like setting that to a variable, and we can see HTTP -- localhost, and then I'm going to change it to this like backticks that we can use JavaScript string templates, and then port. And so now we have like, this is like a super basic Express app now, and let's just for like good measure add in like a little GET request. Let's call this ping, and then it takes rec request, and response. And then we do response.send, let's say pom. Oops, pom. Pom. Okay. So if in our like wonderful lives this works, this will be awesome. So then if we do like nodemon index.js, oh cool, see the magic at localhost 3000. So if you open this up, it says cannot get. That's because we don't have a route there. But if we do ping, it says pong. Okay, so like we have our basic web server like working. And this is good because now we're gonna like, whoops, all this extra stuff. We're gonna start like using this as like our jump off point for all the other things we're going to add. Yep. Yes. So it says like, so nodemon is like this thing which refreshes the project every time you make a change. And so this is all cool. What I want to flag is what we haven't done yet is like we have this like scripts play in our package.json where we can define like how the project should get like run. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a few things here. So when we do npm start, we're going to say we want node index.js. And this is just saying that when a person does npm start, it's going to run that command. And the same with it if we do npm run dev, then we want to, since we're developing, we can do like nodemon index.js. So like in your package.json, like defining these like scripts are just handy to do if you're like, so that there's always a standard way of like starting and stopping your application, or basically just starting your application, whether it's in like development mode or in production. So now if we do like npm like run dev, it'll like run it rather than having to do nodemon index.js. Okay, so we've got nodemon running in development. Okay, what comes next? When building for like deploying to the web, it's a really good idea to like separate any of like the keys. Like if you've got like username, password, all that stuff for like login, you like never want to like check that into code, which is going to like go like in your application. And so one way to do this is to use like a config file, like a configuration file, and on top of that, pass in variables which like live in your like node environment. So like I'm just going to step through that real quick. So I'm going to create a new file called config.js, and essentially what it's just going to be is a module.exports equals. And so module.exports is a way of defining in like the Node.js world. Here is like basically like a JSON object which can be read in as a kind of a package in like other parts of your application. So you'll see how this works. So if I define like username, so like we need this username stuff and passwords that we can define like this authentication, like who can access that. So username is going to be process.env.username, and we'll see what this process.env thing is in a second. Password, process.env.password, and then we want to define our port, which is process.env.port, or 3000. So in JavaScript, you can define what a variable should be assigned, or if that thing doesn't exist, if it's undefined, then you can assign it something else. So you have this like the pipe operators to kind of say, if there's this like port variable defined in your like node environment, then use that. If not, use something else. And you'll see how this works in a second. And the last thing is that since we're using MongoDB, this is going to come at some point. We can do MongoDB URI and browsers.env.mongodb URI, or, and I can never remember what this thing lives at, but it looks like this. So blah, blah, blah. Let me paste that in. So let's change this to, oops, my demo. Okay. So MongoDB is going to be like serving itself at localhost 27017. It's like a defined thing in MongoDB. Like you can change it if you want, but this is like the standard Mongo port number. And remember that like databases are just like servers themselves. They're kind of like listening for connections and incoming and outgoing data. Okay, so we've got this like config file, which like will have all of our super important information. And what this like module.exports thing allows us to do is to say, so let's get rid of port since we don't need that anymore. And we can say const config is equal to require dot config. And so this is like reading in this config file like from the local file system. And you can see that it requires this like dot slash because it's like looking for what's living inside the directory hierarchy. But the nice thing is we can read in all of those variables from here. So like everything will be now like if we want the port, we do config.port. Oops. And if we save that, oops, port is not defined. Because it's here, right? So we can do change that. There's this thing called error-driven development where you can like you basically like make all these errors and then fix them, and then that's like how you build projects. I'm not making that up; it's a real thing. Okay, so now we've got like these like important pieces of our application stored in our configuration, but there's still no username and password that's being defined. And this is where this .env package that we downloaded earlier comes into play, because what we can do is say require .env.config. So .env is a package which reads in like variables that you define in your terminal or in a file called .env. So like let's say here we create a file called .env, and these are what are called like node environment variables. These are the things which you set like when you run your server. It's like the super secret password, your username, like the authentication keys for this and that. And how that looks like is that it's just like this file that has, oh, oops, I need to change this to, it's just the actual symbol .env. And so here, you would define like a username. Let's call this admin, and a password. Do you have any ideas for a super cool password? Okay. So let's do super cool password with underscores. We're definitely going to change that later because then like my heroku will get hacked and it'll be a bummer. Okay, so we've defined all this stuff, and the cool thing now what we can do is say, if we go here, let's do console.log config.username, and it prints admin. So what it's doing is it's like grabbing all this like super secret stuff and adding it to like in our config file. It's saying like look in this .env file, grab whatever's in there, and fill in the blanks here. And for the rest of the application, you can always reference like all of your configuration stuff using this config file. So everything will be config.username, config.port, config.password. And you'll see that this is, like, we'll read in those variables when we do our authentication.
So maybe this will become more clear as we move on. But what's confusing for me about this is that once you make this website live,
Yes.
Where will that .env file be? Will it still be on your computer, or you?
It will be on the server, except we'll override. So like in some ways, you create this like .env file as you're developing, and if you've got like your team of people, like you might agree on like here's like kind of the public developer like env setup. But if you are like once you like launch to production, you might have like the production environment variables. So like when we go in Heroku, we'll like change these, and what that looks like is that like within Heroku, there's a way to set your configuration files. But if you're using some other environment, it's like a good way to like say, okay, we as a team agreed that this is like our production environment variables for like the username and password. Let's define them to be this. And so there's the public-facing version and so on. And we should also note that we should like ignore this .env file so that we don't like accidentally like release it into the world. And that's why it's like good to like define your configuration logic like in a file. Like here's all the configuration things that are needed, and then here's all the things which will fill it in like when we launch. All right, so so like just to demonstrate also how you might override like this like .env thing is like you can even write like username. Let's go in here. I'm just gonna like put this back. Equals like blah, and then do npm run dev. Oh whoa, where did that come from? Wait, what? Why does my name pop up there? It could be, that's strange. Well, so usually you should be able to like override them. It could be that, so if I go in config here and just comment that out and I do this, where are we? What is happening? Oh, I wonder, maybe I have like an environment variable defined somewhere else. Shouldn't be the case. Okay, well, you should be able, username equals yo, and then npm start. That's super weird. Okay, well here we also want to define port. Oh no, we don't really care about that at the moment. So, all right, for whatever reason, my username is printing there, and that shouldn't be the case. But as far as we understand it, that's all working. All right, good. So now the thing we're going to get into is this authentication, like adding this authentication layer. And you'll find actually that it's not like that much more intense than like adding a function. So if we do, and this I'm just going to like refer to this example. So I can't remember. So here we have express basic auth. Let me save that. And then all this stuff here. So here we're defining our authentication. And what we're seeing here is there is like Express comes with this package called Basic Auth. And it allows you to kind of have this like drop down that asks you like for a username and password. And that's what this like challenge parameter says, is that like kind of challenge the user to add in your authentication parameters. And what we're adding in is like the authorizer receives a function. So it's asking does the username that is typed into this like dropdown modal match what's in our config file? And does the password also match what's in our config file? Or actually the thing that we defined in our environment variables. And so the way that authentication works is that a user requests a URL. So they say like, I want to get data from ping, like this /ping endpoint. You add your authentication in between the response or the like where the response should happen. So in this case, we say we can very simply then kind of add this challenge auth in between this like ping. And so it says, if a user says, give me whatever's at this URL, it'll check, are they authenticated? If yes, then continue. If no, then return this like not authorized. And if we now check this, we can go /ping, and now we have this authentication layer. And if we're like, it's admin, and it's a super cool password. Yay! So now we get POM.
So that block is like in the browser?
Yes.
We don't have to
You don't have to
code that.
code that. Exactly. So this is kind of the beauty of using this Express Basic Auth is that you don't have to define any of the views. Like in our Feathers.js app, we had to like define all the views and like the stuff. Here, it's just like using the native browser like authentication kind of challenge modal. Yeah.
It's just those three elements, the challenge of the authorizer function.
Exactly. So now it's always gonna look for, is the username and password, like were they authenticated using those values? And if you, so like let's change these to super secret password.
Where are you defining the code? Because I'm getting code not defined.
Should be in your config file.
Yeah.
So I think in your listener here at the bottom to change this thing. No? Did you read in your config file? Okay, well we're gonna have to like look into that later. So we changed our password. And if we go here, let's try this again. So it should ask us. All right, so we changed our password and it's gonna ask us again. And if I'm like admin, but I put in the wrong password, I'm just like typing in random stuff, it won't allow us to go to the next, like what the page has for us. So that just gives you an idea of like what happens when the authentication fails.
The challenge parameter,
Yeah.
you can set it to false.
So if I do false here,
You have to add not on the.
and then any request that comes in has to have a username and password. So you'd have to like send that in with your GET request. So you can set like a username and password in a GET request as a header. And since we're not doing that, we're kind of asking users to add in their username and password. You have to kind of have some mechanism to receive a username and password. So here we say true, and if we like reload this, then the thing comes back. So this is great because now at any given point, whether it's like a GET request or a POST request, you can add in this authentication. It's called middleware. So you add in this like middleware, and it always asks, are they authenticated, yes or no? And you only have to authenticate once as long as like nothing's changed. So when we define like a POST endpoint in our API, then we'll just add in this like authentication middleware so that people can't like willy-nilly like send stuff to your database. Okay, so this is crazy because now we've just added like authentication to our application, and we can like feel more comfortable putting this online so that like people can't just like send stuff to your database or like steal data that you don't want them to take. Speaking of databases, we want to, oh man, my browser's like about to die for whatever reason. Let's close all this stuff. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is we're gonna like start to add in like all those other aspects. Like we need to have our endpoints for like our kind of the model for our database and some of the things for like receiving data and so on. So let's start from the top. So what we want to do is we want to require mongoose and the path. So let's do, so path, people are like, what's this path thing? And it allows you to like read files more easily in your, or just read files in your directory. So we're going to require that. And then we're also going to add mongoose to the mix because we need database. Mongoose. Okay. Logger equals require. So when you're like developing an application, it's nice to have like a more verbose logging service to just like show like what if people are making requests and so on. You can see like, okay, a get request was made, a post request was made. And there's a whole bunch of them, but this one's called Morgan. And what you can do is say like, oops, like app.use, I think logger get. So this app.use function is just saying like, starting from the beginning, from like top to bottom, as like requests and stuff are coming in, like shove all of the, what's the best way to put it? It serves as a way of passing data from like, or requests from like one step to the next. So in this case, like, in order to get this endpoint at ping, we always need to like authenticate or make sure that we're authenticated. In this case, like, if there's any kind of request, so here, if I go now like that, you can see that the logger kind of received a GET request. And that's cool to just know that like what's happening throughout your application. So we use this like logger thing. And what we want to do, so now we want to connect to Mongoose. So if we remember, as we're developing locally, we need to run like MongoDB. And I think I already have Mongo running, so I'm going to kill that. But so if I do MongoD, so if you run MongoD, it'll like start your Mongo server, and there's like all this text that comes out, but that's just to explain that it's running. And from there, we know that our MongoDB server is running. And what we want to do is we want to load up Mongoose into our application. So we can dump all this stuff since we don't need it. All right, so we've got some pieces here. So we required Mongoose, so now we have like access to all these like functions for using MongoDB in our application. In our config file, we defined here like this MongoDB URI, which is like the URL where MongoDB is living. And here it's URL, so let's change that. And so what this is doing at this step is it's saying connect to MongoDB. So like we have, it's like MongoDB, like the database is running, which is, as I mentioned before, it's the server. So connect to MongoDB, and now let's like make a new schema for like how we might expect our data to come in. So in this case, we have like, let's define something a bit more exciting. So right now we have like our message here, and we can be a bit more verbose here. So type is string. Let's say, I don't know, happy type Boolean. Oops. Okay, so our schema has like two data properties. We can accept a message that has a string in it, or we also have a property called happy, which which gets a true or false. And what this step then does is allow us to create a model, which is like where we're going to put our data. So in this case, I'm just going to call this our hello DB. So this part is like a little bit confusing because like, okay, there's MongoDB, we have to define a schema, we're going to create this model called hello, and it's going to be stored at this variable called like hello.helloDB. But you'll see how this works in a second. So we have like, now MongoDB theoretically is like running, and we can check if that's going to work in a second. But before we do that, there's like a few more functions which are like handy for us to take. And I'm just going to add those up here. Okay, so just to kind of like highlight what's happening here, Express has like, it expects data to come in a certain way. And in this case, we define that we want to handle data that's like coming in and out of the application as JSON. You can imagine that if you had like XML or something like that, you would define that here as well. This like URL encoded, also like middleware is saying that if we are getting data from like a form, it just like makes our lives easier from like sending data from the form and so on. And like this we saw before as well. Like we have our static folder, like where our index.html file will live, and it's going to be living in this public folder. There was this question like, what is this path.resolve? And it's just to deal with like on Windows machines, for example, like it needs to escape like the slashes. So sometimes if you have like spaces in your directory names, there's not always a good way of dealing with those slashes. So here we use this like path.resolve to kind of cross platform deal with like those funky things which happen with like directory names. So now what we can do is do a little test and see if we make a post request to, let's say, API. Let's send data to our hello DB. I think it's hellodb dot, let's look it up here, create, and what we're going to do is get a request.body, and then from the result, we're going to, let's just like console.log it. Result. Okay, so if we're lucky, what will happen is that if we make a post request with some data that matches this thing in our schema, then we will get a new data entry in our database. So if we, let's like just give that a try. So if we have this thing, and we go to post /API, and in our body, we define, let's do this. So we have message, hello, and then happy, yes. We send this. Oh shit, not authorized. Ah, we're not authorized. That makes sense, because what we need to do is we need to send in our authorization. And since Postman gives us some nice tools for this, this is like super handy for us. We can do basic auth, because that's what we have. We can fill in our details. So admin, and it was super secret password, right? Super secret password. So now if we send it, ooh, okay, cool. So that post request came in and it logged. The reason why it's continuing to load is because we never sent a response. So like, you always want to close off your request response like loops. by saying here select response.send result. So now, if we make that same request, that post request, if we do that, we get back our data. So, like, our infrastructure is up and running, and theoretically, okay, before we like go into deploying stuff, let's just do a few good housekeeping rules. So for using promises, you always want to catch your errors. Oops. So it's always like then and catch. So you can do return error. And this just allows us to like understand what's going on if like something fails. Let's say you sent some data that wasn't the correct property. And so here, if someone goes to our API and they make a GET request, we want to find, and we want people to get our data like that. So just like that, we have GET and POST. And so if we save this, and if I change this to, let's create one more thing. So Postman is a handy tool. If I do GET, not authorized. Okay, so if we do this again, basic auth admin, and then send, aha, there's our data. So remember, like this authentication layer is protecting us from evil intruders who might want to take our information or send like nasty data into our database. With a password like super secret password, it's not going to help us very much, but we're going to change that later. The last thing that we're going to do to like kind of polish this off is we're going to like add like a super duper simple front end. So let's create this folder called public. And remember, like all of our static assets are going to live in a public folder. We're going to add a new file called index.html. HTML, head, title, hi, body, and then script, and then here, oh man, okay, so if we do, let's do h1, add a hello, and there's like absolutely no styling here, but that's okay. And then we add a button, let's see, say hello, and we say ID hello button. Ooh, all right. So we got this. Let's add a div and call this hello view. So like we're just going to display how many instances we have in our database, and we're going to on click add a new add a post request to our database. Okay, so what's going to happen here? So what's going to happen is we're going to, so const hellos equal, so document.query selector hello view. So this is going to grab that DOM element. And then this like dollar operator is just to indicate that we're grabbing like a DOM element. It doesn't have to be there, but it's just a convention that like came out of this like jQuery thing. So this hello button. Okay. So what's going to happen here now is that so when people load the page, they're going to see how many hellos are in our database. So we can say fetch API dot then result. Oh man. And then we can say hello view dot inner HTML. I'm just like smashing through this right now, but I think you'll get the idea. Result dot length. Yeah, I think that's right. Dot catch. Because let's see, alert. Oh, I guess we don't need to append it, you're right. We can just set it equal to that. So let's just try this out. Oh, it needs to go somewhere. What are we thinking? So if a user goes to our application, they need to be able to get that index.html file. Oops. So here we go, we have this like at that default endpoint, response.send file index.html. Oh man, we're doing really well here, I think. Hello. Okay, cool. So it's going to ask us for authentication. We go here, super secret password undefined. Why is it undefined? Because no, fetch is a native browser thing. Fetch API then result console. So this is where we're gonna like debug some stuff. Result. What have we got here? Basic redirected. Did we? Why is this happening? Let's try this again. So in our public, fetch API, then why? Oh, right, because it returns like this weird JSON thing. So result return result.json. Oh man, this is something that gets me every single time. And here we are again. So it's like this weird read stream blah blah blah. If we do this again, now we have it too. Okay, so we have to like convert that JSON object into like something that's like readable. For some reason it's sensitive, this like weird thing. Okay, so now we have like our view that's like totally beautiful and awesome. Now we have to deal with clicking the button. And so what we're going to do there is that we're going to add a super sweet event listener which says that add event listener, and like you could add all this stuff in P5 like on like what is it, button like mouse press and stuff like that, but this is just like the vanilla JavaScript way. On click function, let's stick with the ES6 syntax, blah blah. Okay, so this is where we can make another fetch request, but we're going to have to add in a specification that indicates that it is indeed a post request. So actually, let's get rid of all this. So const options equals this is where we can cheat a little bit because it's not super important. So public index get hellos, the message, all this stuff. So we're all of them here. We do this. So our message is always going to just send hello, and let's just say happy is always true. Which I know all of you are feeling like this right now. So we have these options like post. It follows the request where it's going to go. We're going to stringify that message. So here we're going to do add our options, and then result. Then we're going to do the exact same thing that we did up here because essentially it's going to send back JSON again. And what we can do is just replace the values with our current view, and I think that should work. Oh man, this is exciting. So let's alert the error if anything happens. Okay, so now let's test this. The moment of truth, and if we say hello, what did we get? Oh, it could be actually that it just sends back JSON in a format that we actually like. So maybe we can just get rid of all that. It's like, it's good I didn't like say the whole word. Then it would like make this video really not visible. Ah! What's happening? Yeah, we can add bleeps and stuff. Ah, shoot. Okay. So for whatever reason, we must have encountered this here. We're doing that same thing. Well, for whatever reason, the result does not want to come back in the way that we like it. Oh, it would be great to solve this right now. Result. Okay. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and it's going to be great for all of us. Ah. Oh, because it's sending back the actual data and not an array. So what that means for us is that we're just going to do plus all right. Const. We're going to do let hellos equals an array. And so when our data comes in, what we're going to do is we're going to do hellos equal result. And now, whenever we add something, we can add that to our result. So hellos dot push result. Yeah, and then our hello view is equal to our hellos dot length, right?
Yeah.
Boom. Okay. Okay. So this is great. Our application is like working and it's done. Now we're going to deploy it in our 7 minutes here together. So heroku.com. Woo. All right, let's do this. So let's create a new app, and let's call this the Hello Demo. Ah, it's not available. Hello. Let's call it QH Hello Demo. Okay, create app. So it's gonna like do all this stuff for us. And what we're going to do is we're gonna go to resources, and we're gonna go to find more add-ons. And here we have like all these things like third-party services, but what we really want is mlab, which is for MongoDB. We're going to say install mlab MongoDB, and it's going to ask us where do we want to put it. We're going to do this QH hello demo, and we're going to provision the add-on. So it's like all this database stuff lives in this other service, and now we've got MongoDB run like accessible to our application. And remember this like .env stuff that we spent so much time on? Now we have this like configuration variable living here, and it's gonna like live at this like long string of stuff. And so this is where we're going to find like our super cool username and password to override our like development stuff. So username, let's keep it admin, and password, which I'm going to change after this video, let's just do QH. Okay, so now we've got like the three things which we want our our Heroku app to like understand about our application. We're going to go to deploy, and here we have some options. You can like deploy from GitHub, which is like maybe a more familiar route, so that you can like just deploy a repo that's like living on the web, or you can use this like Heroku command line stuff. Since I have that like this set up on my machine, I think I'm just gonna do that. Oh shoot, okay. So we're gonna do some like git stuff here. So git status, git status. It's not a thing, uh-oh. So what we're gonna do is we're going to do git init. If we do git status, it's gonna be like, oh, there's all this stuff. I'm like, all right, git add all. Git status, again, all this green stuff, like git commit m, initial commit. And so like Heroku's gonna use this like git like file structure as a way to communicate with like this remote server where we're sending up all of our files. And so here we can like define where like this repo will like get sent up. So I'm gonna set this as my Heroku remote server. And now the super cool thing is if I do git push Heroku master, since we're on this master branch, it's going to do all this stuff. It's going to like install all of the dependencies, like this, all the npm install express, like Morgan, blah blah blah, all that stuff. It's going to like happen all up in here. And since we like created the npm start and npm run dev, like it's just going to run npm start once everything is done. And if this worked, okay, what's our password class? Okay, and we've got 0 things, but we can do that and it's working. And if we open it up in a whole nother browser, it's going to be like, yo, what's your password? Boom, 7, it's working. That's the whole process. And so like every time you make a change to your application now, you can run this deploy script to like send your local development stuff up to the server. You'll have authentication running so that you're like protected. And yeah, it's kind of all of the, as far as I understand it, if you make a post request now, it should only work if you're authenticated in this application. So if like, I think Eva, you had this, this app where you're sending stuff to your own personal database, and you had to add like the username and password to the header of your post request, but now the world is your oyster, and you can like test out all this stuff. And we made it in time.
How would you now, you said you can push again.
So
now you make some changes.
yeah, let's make a
Add an
change.
extra
Let's add some style, because right now we've got no style. Let's turn all of our type to font family. Oh, we've got so many nice options. Let's do this thing. And we're like, okay, so now we've got git status. Like, oh, we added this thing. So git commit am added new font. And actually what you would normally do is like check to see like what your changes look like. Okay, cool, we've got this like old school style, and now we're gonna do git push Heroku master.
Why did AM?
AM is like shorthand for like check in everything that's changed and add a message. Yeah, you can like mash them together. And so it'll like go through and like install the things again.
So we shouldn't deploy
I mean, there's like this whole idea of like continuous deployment and stuff, just that you're always just, like testing it in the real world. But now if we go to here, our like actual app, we've got like this new font that's like up there. And like that's the thing. There's like other deployments, like setups, like you can deploy to DigitalOcean. If you take a class with Sean, that's like usually his like preference. Everything is more or less doing the same thing. It's like with Heroku, it's nice to have like this interface for checking all these like configuration variables, like adding, like provisioning these other like add-ons, and like you can like look into the logs, and you're not always having to SSH into everything, which are good skills to have. I totally recommend it, but since we're just like fully interested in like getting stuff out there, let's do it that way. Yep.
So now we have like a database that collects something, right?
Yes.
So what if we wanted to change, like add a parameter to that database, and we do that later, like whoever.
Yeah.
Then do we change?
So you would go in and be like, okay, I'm up in my index file. You can change your schema. Depending on the database, it might complain like, oh, not all of the documents have the same properties. But I think you should be fine. It'll just like, you just have to do like error checking if you started adding like all these different properties, and in your front end you're like asking for like the happy property, but you deleted that. But I think you should just be able to change the schema and it should be fine. And you can actually go into MLab and like inspect and change stuff. So you have your collections, like, yay. Exactly. So you have this like hellos thing and you're like, I'm gonna get rid of the first one. And it's like having like this Robo 3T thing like on your machine, but it's like on the web and you have like a nice interface and stuff. But yeah, I mean, like this is kind of a really nice like launching pad for like building your applications. But like, I mean, David, like you mentioned, like, oh, I want to test React. Like, you could build your React front end application separate from your API, and you could just be making requests to this like API that you built. So you don't have to use the front end that you develop here. You could like just build a front end which like communicates from another place.
What would you host the front end?
Is there's no like nothing like in there that has stuff that needs to be hidden. You could like build like a production version of your front end application and like host that on like GitHub pages. I do that a lot with like my website or like with other projects. Just you compile, like transpile everything into like a bundle, and then you can just host it for free on GitHub. I mean, of course, if you like have performance issues or like whatever things that you are really worried about, then there's other places to host that stuff. But, yep.
Do you have any added deploy
That's a whole different thing. I mean, it's not, these days it's actually quite simple. You can just like go to GitHub with like an index.html file in your repo, and as long as that lives there, you can go to the settings and set like use the master branch as the GitHub pages branch or whatever, and it'll just render whatever that is, like your username.github.io, and if there's an index.html file in there, then it'll render that file. Yeah, we didn't talk about WebSockets, which like G1, after like chatting with you, I got like really excited about them, because like right now, like if I press the hello button and then like you press the hello button somewhere else, it won't update synchronously. But with WebSockets, it's like another communication protocol. Like you can have this like real-time updating stuff, but we don't care about that because we're old school. And, but it's good to know that like everyone will be talking about like, oh, WebSockets and Pure.js and blah blah blah. It's all about just like having the protocol to send stuff across the web. So, all right, I'll see you next week. And like final project stuff, just like reach out if you have questions. But thanks for your attention. You're all great. This file is going to be like 10 gigabytes. Bye.